Hello YouTube, welcome back to Nutkin Farm. It's November 2025 and I'm going to take you for a little walk down block 2 of my orchard before I do any particular groundwork. Going to have a look at how the trees are going, and I thought it might be a reasonable backdrop for a discussion on what we might be expecting for the 2026 macadamia season. And when I say that, I mean the nuts that drop in 2026. The season really starts in 2025, as all the farmers know, with the flowering season in spring and the early nut development in late spring and summer. The early signs are definitely promising. We had a long flowering season, which meant plenty of time for the trees to, put out flowers and have them pollinated. And we also had a dry September, which is good because macadamias natively aren't expecting rain in spring, and we've had a couple of rainy springs. This was the first dry spring we'd had in quite a while. We had 19 millimetres of rain in September in Rosebank against an average of 58. So it was a real dry September. Now, my neighbour Peter Fraser often says the best years, the bumper years, are ones that have a dry September and a wet October. In October, we got about 130 millimetres of rain as opposed to an average of 122. So I suppose you could call it a bit of a wet October, but it wasn't wet until the very end. And in fact, 100 millimetres of that 130 fell on one day, and the rest was pretty much a day either side of that. So it was quite a dry October, and I'm sure some people would have been a little bit worried about whether their crops were going to fall off the tree. I've certainly had one call from a farmer who's dismayed at the amount of shedded nut that he's seeing on the ground. But generally speaking, shedded nut means there's an excess on the tree, and that does kind of make sense. If we had such a long flowering season, there might have been an over-pollination and an over-supply of nut set, and the trees are now sort of regulating their way back out of that. I don't think it would be a direct response to the dry early October we had. Certainly that wasn't the case in 2019, when we had dry all the way till Christmas, and we didn't really start getting some massive rains until Christmas time in early 2020. And that was a real bumper year for a lot of farmers. Good quality scores as well. So we're setting up for, we think anyway, a good season. And that's what the industry publications are saying. And obviously there's some encouraging notes going out from the AMS saying, look, you've got to spend money, you've got to protect your crop, do everything right. At the moment, late October, early November, people are having their Halloween spray, which is the centre of which is indoxacarb, and that's effectively cockroach bait, but it's an insecticide used to control macadamia seed weevil. And they remind us that timing is everything with that, because if you can get the macadamia seed weevil dealt with while nuts are at pea head size, it'll break the breeding cycle for those pests for 13 weeks. And because the life cycle of a macadamia seed weevil is only 40 days, or just over sort of 5 weeks, you can actually get rid of macadamia seed weevil with one dose of indoxacarb. And given the price of indoxacarb, you wouldn't want to do it twice. The only exception to that rule is flowers, farms where some trees have flowered and set nut much later than others, so that you're missing out on that window for spraying macadamia seed weevil, or you might have to do it at 2 different times. Or if you do it at one time and some of the trees miss out, well, there is a new spray called Vertente, which is much more of an insecticide for adult macadamia seed weevils. I've discussed that in a couple of recent videos. I am excited by it because it can mop up the remains of weevil while also targeting the early onset of fruit spotting bug. And fruit spotting bug is the major pest of macadamias still in our industry, and it's the pest that sort of starts rearing its head in December and goes all the way through pretty much to when you harvest. So there's something to be said for the Tente. This is the first year we're sort of allowed to use it, and it will be interesting to see if it benefits people's crops. Rain now is what's needed to feed these trees. Of course, apart from any other fertiliser you want to put down. I've had certain opinions from a Norco agronomist that you really want your fertiliser down by the end of November, so that any phosphorus and potassium that might go into the nut actually has a nice benefit on the nut size. When you're feeding organically, the original rule of thumb is that you've got almost a month for organic food to get into the trees. There are people who doubt that, including my former agronomist Mark Duncan. He thinks, particularly with chicken manure, you can start seeing reactions in trees before 1 month. And look, it wouldn't surprise me. It's one reason I sort of tend to gravitate towards cow manure myself, because it does seem to be a little slower release. And if you haven't got a budget for doing multiple feeds in a year, then that's one way to get more bang for your buck. The slow release effect of cow manure and its ability to feed the tree right through the nut development season. And that's nice. Now, I'm not showing you baby nuts, one, because they're a bit too high up in this block and you couldn't really see them. And two, because of the golden rule, don't look up. You're not allowed to look up till Christmas, and then at Christmas time you can look up and see what Santa brought you. And if you look up now, you just get worried because you really don't see too much evidence of nutset or baby nuts. I can see some. You would need an incredibly big screen for you to see them, even though I'm filming this in 4K. But there's, I know there's nut there. You have to spray in the belief that there's nut there. You can't just look for proof this early and say I'm having a good season or not a good season. So there's an element of speculation, isn't there? The rumour is we're going to have a good season because of the weather conditions, not because of what we're actually seeing trees do. But there's enough experience in the industry now. Each year is a very individual proposition, but there's enough experience in the industry now to say we are, subject to any weather disasters like hail or that sort of stuff, probably heading for a good year. So, you're a macadamia farmer. Should you be rubbing your hands in glee, plotting the next purchase of your tractor or your car, planning a holiday overseas? Well, not quite yet. There are more than just weather restrictions on a macadamia crop, and the one that may loom large as we go into February and March 2026 is the macadamia price. What might happen to that? Well, the speculation I'm engaging in here is amongst the very earliest, because there isn't a lot of chatter about it online. There's no one really offering huge indications of what a macadamia price would be. But we do know a few things. Firstly, we know that the crop in 2025 tanked. We went well less than expectations. The quality was down, the quantity was down. The Australian macadamia market was expecting so much more that it could both export and consume locally, because we do consume about 40% of what we grow. We also know that at the start of the 2025 season, the industry had a shortage of nuts. So the coffers were empty and they were looking for that season to fill them, and we didn't. So it would be a reasonable assumption that the coffers are going to be empty at the start of the 2026 season, particularly as far as local consumption is concerned. What that means, or what we've discovered that means over time, is that when it comes to winning the business from farmers, the processors do tend to offer a better price in order to secure those promises of crop. They need some crop early, and they need it to fill their coffers. Obviously, they need a nut to sell before they can make a margin on it themselves. You can't sell nothing and make a profit on it. So you need the farmer's nuts. My concern is for what might happen later in the 2026 season. We haven't got any alarm bells ringing from any other major macadamia producing country at the moment. And by alarm bells, I mean failed flowering season, failed early crop, natural disasters ruining a crop, that sort of thing. It seems a fairly normal year in the macadamia world, at least for the countries that produce large volumes of macadamias. And by that I mean obviously South Africa, Kenya, China's a bit inscrutable, as China often is. So we've got that kind of a situation facing us, and you go, all right. We know that there are lots of new plantings around the world. We know that progressively over time they will come online and bear crops. And if the whole world's having a kind of normal year, then because of those new plantings, supply is going to go up. And it's predicted to go up by more than demand is going up. What that could mean is that while there is a shortage of nuts at the start of the 2026 season, that shortage may not continue all the way through the season. And then particularly for processors who sell a lot of their nuts overseas, either as nut in shell or exports of kernel, we may find that in mid-2026 there could be more supply than demand. So you've got a competition. The processors will certainly want your nuts early, but when it comes to wanting them later, that's a big question mark. And it really will, we'll need to revisit that question, of course, come February, March, when we see what kind of crop the Australian industry has on. But this would be a year of any years that I would be advising farmers not to take a notional price offering. Now, just to recap, a notional price is one that a macadamia processor can promise you, but change at its own whim throughout the season, depending on market conditions, their own business conditions, that sort of thing. Now, I've got a bias against notional price offers anyway. I think they're borderline illegal to start with, because there's long-standing contract law that is very much against the principle that you can put in a contract that just allows someone to change the price in exchange for the same consideration from the other person. Consideration being your loads of macadamia nuts. Leave that bias to one side though as much as possible. The ability to change a macadamia price in a year where supply is likely to be short at the beginning and possibly too much at the end, there is a real risk that if you go with a notional price offer, your price may be reduced on you in your later shipments. And I'm talking about June, July, August, those sorts of later shipments. And because the processors by and large have you on instalment plans, any change in the price also affects what they pay you for the instalments of payments that they're already sort of going to owe you for what you've shipped in February and March. So you're not protected. Your early crop isn't protected because those later instalments, and some of those later instalments can be up to 50% of what you earn, they could be affected in the change in the notional price. So particularly if we are going to get a good year, start thinking now, because I know a lot of farmers have been with the one processor for sometimes decades. They've got a good relationship with their grower liaison. That's great. They've got a good working relationship. They've got used to delivery methods and all that sort of stuff. But there are also good processors out there who offer all of those things. They might be slightly different. They may offer slightly different freight subsidies and that sort of stuff around the edges. But you would want to look very carefully at your options. Now isn't a bad time to do it. You can go back over my macadamia pricing reviews that I put out in the first quarter of every year and look at who's offering a fixed price. Obviously, it's not just whether it's fixed or notional. You want to check that the company that's offering you the fixed price has the financial wherewithal to back it up, or has a financial track record of backing it up. But you definitely don't want to put yourself in the position of the poor Wally's growers, nuts, who had their notional price cut by half last year. And that's a year where demand exceeded supply. It was not about supply and demand of nuts directly. There was a large demand for macadamia nuts. Wally's made the wrong business decisions, overpromised crop to their buyers, got in a lot of trouble, and then used farmers as the escape hatch by dropping the price payable to farmers for absolutely no fault of the farmers and absolutely nothing to do with the demand for macadamia nuts. They had their price changed on them because they signed a contract that let Wally's do exactly that. Now, I would argue, is the time to try and stamp notional pricing out of this industry, and to say to your processor, no matter how many years you've been with them, I'm not your banker, I'm not your insurance company. I want to sell my nuts to you for a price. I want to do a deal on that price. I want to send you my nuts, and I want us all to make a profit. Let's see what happens as the season goes ahead, and obviously I'll be reviewing what the processors are offering growers for the upcoming season. Just bear in mind that as we get closer to Christmas and as we get closer to the new year, if we are really going to have a good year, it might be time to lock in a price so that it can't be reduced on you midway through the season. And even if that fixed price is a little bit lower, I mean, we had a situation where the Wally's growers had $4 notional. Macadamia's Direct was offering $3.90 fixed. And, you know, ask a Wally's grower who they would have rather been with last year. And if you don't want that to happen to you, and Wally's was a reputable player. They'd been around 30 years. They were, in fact, you know, a standout example of treating farmers well in terms of their terms and conditions. That's not going to save you if sometimes they make, you know, mistakes about their business model. You don't want them to have that lever they can pull that basically dumps the farmer in it for mistakes that only the processor could have made. So have a think about that, guys, and by all means have a chat below. There are arguments in favour of notional pricing. There will be growers liaisons who say, oh yes, but in order to offer you a fixed price, we have to offer you less. Well, yeah, not really true, because some of the best offers in last year's comparison were actually fixed price offers. Some of the best prices on offer were actually fixed. So they can do it. It's just a matter of the basis on which they're meant to compete for growers. And if enough of us shun the notional price offerings and go for fixed prices, then the processors really don't have much option but to offer the fixed price, because like I said, they want your nuts and they need a nut to make a profit on a nut. And perhaps now in 2026, it could be the perfect year to underline that for everybody. Right, time to do some slashing before the next lot of rain comes. And the next lot of rain will be actually welcome, because I'm walking along here and it doesn't feel very much like it's been raining. So it just means that the moisture is really soaking into the soil at the moment, and the trees are grateful for it. Be in touch soon, guys. Bye for now.